This is the Tom Bigby Tales, and I'm your host, Shannon Evans. I write about a small town in northeast Mississippi called Columbus along the Tom Bigby River in Lowndes County, Mississippi. Sometimes I write about the rest of the state. This episode is about Charles Baskerville. Now, he's one of many Baskervilles, but specifically, we're going to talk about the Charles Baskerville, the chemist. But in order to understand who he was, let's talk about the Baskervilles in general. Charles the First, as I shall call him, was the first member of the Baskerville family that I can locate living in the United States, which was Charles Baskerville, the son of William Rust Baskerville Sr. and Mary Eaton. Charles was born in 1788 in Mecklenburg County, Virginia. He grew up at Lombardy Grove on a plantation, and his father, as I said before, was William Rust Baskerville Sr. and Mary Eaton, a wealthy family who grew primarily indigo and rice and tobacco in Virginia. Charles was educated at the University of Edinburgh, and he had tutors from Trinity College of Dublin and the University of Glasgow later to come and educate his own children. He unfortunately had to abandon his studies in Edinburgh as he was studying abroad because it was the middle of the War of 1812. He was a classically trained scholar who spoke French and was a literary genius. His son would immigrate to Columbus, Mississippi, and he is whom I will call Charles II. Charles II was born in 1821 in Virginia and lived in Columbus until his death in 1890, and he is buried at Friendship Cemetery. Charles would serve first as lieutenant colonel in Wade's cavalry in the Confederate Army before rising to the rank of full colonel. Charles II had a son, Charles III. Charles Baskerville III also was born in Virginia, and he too is buried at Friendship Cemetery. Now, he died when his son, Charles, the future chemist, was 5 years old. Young Charles would go to live with his grandfather, Charles II, and his wife, and live in Columbus. But young Charles was born in Noxubee County. Young Charles the chemist was a chemist and a college professor and was born at Deerbrook in Noxubee County. And his father, as I said before, was a physician, and he had served in the Confederate Army, Charles III, as a captain. Young Charles's mother was Augusta Johnson. The family, of course, as stated prior to this, had traced their origins back to a Charles Baskerville I, who served as a Continental Army officer during the American Revolution. His young Charles's grandfather had been William Baskerville, a noted professor of English at Vanderbilt University from 1881 to 1889. Young Charles's father distinguished himself in treating the sick during the yellow fever epidemics in Memphis, Tennessee in 1876 and 1879. He unfortunately died of pneumonia contracted in the course of the latter epidemic. So young Charles grew up in his maternal grandparents' home in Columbus, where he worked part-time as a printer's double. After a varied academic career, including studies in local Columbus schools, including Franklin Academy, and 2 years at the University of Mississippi and specialty courses at the University of Virginia in 1890, and then Vanderbilt from 1890 to 1891, he entered the University of North Carolina, from which he would eventually graduate with a BS in 1892. Young Charles's undergraduate record at Chapel Hill was absolutely brilliant. He was a member of Phi Beta Kappa, the Gimgulls, and Delta Kappa Epsilon fraternity. He was also president of the very powerful University Athletic Association and first editor of the student newspaper, The Tar Heel. which is very interesting considering a contemporary of his would have been one of the first editors who founded Harvard Review, who would have been Blewett Harrison Lee. Anyways, Charles in his spare time was fullback manager of the Carolina football squads of 1892, 1893, and 1894. After an intensive summer course in chemistry at the University of Berlin in 1893, after a semester abroad, Baskerville returned to Chapel Hill to complete his graduate work under Francis Preston Venable, and in 1894, Charles would receive a doctorate for his dissertation, A Comparison of the Methods of Estimation and Separation of Zirconium. Within the next decade, he advanced rapidly in the university hierarchy, serving successively as an assistant in the chemical laboratory, an instructor in chemistry, an assistant professor of chemistry, and as an associate professor of chemistry by 1898. In 1900, upon Venable's succession to the presidency of the university, Baskerville became chairman of the chemistry department, Smith Professor of General and Analytic Chemistry, and Director of the Chemical Laboratory, all of which positions he held until 1904. From 1901 onward, he was also staff chemist for the North Carolina State Geologic Survey. During this period, Baskerville continued his research, concentrating on a study of the rare earths thorium, lithium, and I may not say this right, lanthanum, praseodymium, and neodymium, and the rare metals titanium and zirconium. This work was climaxed in 1903 when Baskerville announced the discovery of two previously unknown chemical elements, which he named Carolinium and Berzelium. Though refuted by later research, these claims were sufficiently respected by his contemporaries to earn him an invitation to join the faculty of the City Colleges of New York, which he would accept in 1904. From 1904 onward, Baskerville served as professor of chemistry at the City College and as director of its chemical laboratories, succeeding D.O. Doremus. In these capacities, he completely recognized and reorganized his department, designed new laboratory facilities, and acted as a consultant to the city, state, and federal governments in which fields as wood alcohol regulation and school and factory ventilation. At the same time, his personal research shifted from pure science to such applied fields as the manufacture and use of surgical anesthetics, refinement of vegetable oil, recovery of shale oil, and recycling of paper. As chairman of the American Chemical Society's Committee on Occupational Diseases, he was among the first scientists to study seriously the problem of industry-related illnesses. A member and fellow of the American Association of the Advancement of Science, Baskerville served as secretary of its chemical section, secretary of the association's council, and vice president and section secretary. He was also a member of the American Institute of Chemical Engineers, the American Electrochemical Society, the Washington Academy of Science, the New York Academy of Science, the Franklin Institute, and several other scientific associations. He authored 6 books and over 200 scientific papers. Baskerville also wrote extensively on scientific topics for such popular journals as Science and Review of Reviews. Baskerville was married to Mary Boland Snow of Raleigh. The two had 2 children, Charles Jr., who would become a popular New York commercial artist and portrait painter and a muralist, and their daughter, Elizabeth Snow. Charles Baskerville would die at his home in New York in 1922 and was buried at Oakwood Cemetery in Raleigh, North Carolina. That is Charles Baskerville of the Baskervilles of Columbus and Virginia. I want to thank you for coming on my tour of Columbus and some of the more interesting people who were born or lived here throughout our history. Good night.